Hello everyone, my name is Tharp and this is my presentation on the analysis of the Night, Death, and the Devil. So let's go ahead and get started. So really quick, just a brief overview before we delve into this. On the next slide I'm going to show you an image of the artwork at hand. I'm going to talk about some of the core pieces of it just so you get an understanding. Next I'm going to talk about how properties and elements and influence of the artist create this somber mood that is really the key piece of my presentation. And you're going to be hearing me say it a lot, so just bear with me. And then I'm just going to go into detail about the background and analysis of those properties, how they add to that mood. So let's go ahead and get started with the picture right here. So just some things to point out. You have the knight in the middle right here on his horse. You have death right here on his horse right here. You have the devil behind him. You have the dog down here. And you have the castle back here in the background. And also something interesting to point out is that you have the date that the print was created and then AD, which would of course stand for Albrecht Dürer. And also one other interesting to point out is that the media used for this artwork is actually a print on like a copper block, which is important for this next slide right here. So talking about some background, Dürer was born in 1471 in Nuremberg, Germany. As to why that would be important, you might ask? Well, you got to think, he would have been an adult around 15th century Germany, and while it's definitely not dark ages, it's more so classified as like high middle ages, right? There's not a lot of things going on technology-wise. You're still kind of in the dark society-wise, and I think this print overall represents that really well. It takes place in the past. It's got dark overtones to it. Next, according to Jacob Weiss, Dürer both worked at his father's shop from when he was a kid to a young adult age, and Dürer also made 2 visits to Italy. So as to why the working at his father's shop was important, well, the whole basis of the shop is that it was a wood printing shop, in which case they would get requests for these illustrations that would be put on wood blocks, and then they would make them. So this is really where Dürer gets a lot of his inspiration for the media he uses. And then as for his visits to Italy, there are 2 main things that he brings back from his visits to Italy, because I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but Italy during this time was going through a renaissance, and there are 2 main components he brings back. The first one is this idea of realism when it comes to figures, either with human figures or animals. The faces look more real, they're in more detail. You can see muscles on his figures, both in animals and in humans. And then you also have this idea of symbolism, things in the artwork standing more so for what than they actually are. And in The Night, Death, and the Devil, how this applies is that with Death and the Devil, obviously, because they're not really there, they're more so seen as obstacles in his way. You have the Death who is just waiting for the Night to slip up and get himself killed or get himself hurt to kind of like take him on his way. Or you're waiting for the Devil the Devil's waiting for the Night to commit some sort of sin or travesty to like take his soul away. It's not that they're actually there, it's more so that they're just there in spirit. It's kind of the idea that they're there. So going on from background, I'm going to start talking about some actual elements or properties of the artwork. So the first one I want to talk about is line, and there are 3 main components to the line work in this artwork. There is detail, there is eye position, and then there is the aspect of Dürer being a mathematician, which I'll get more into in just a second. So first off, you have detail, and that one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Looking at the detail on the armor right here, the detail of the muscle of the horse, this all attributes to the great amount of line work in this piece. If there isn't that many lines, if there isn't like that amount of assortment of lines, that you just don't get that detail that's in this print. Next you have eye position. So you have both Death and the Devil looking at the Night, which makes a lot of sense for the somber mood I'm talking about, right? Because they're completely focused on him. They want him to fail. It's overbearing on him. That makes the most sense. And then you have our main subject material, the Knight, the horse, and the dog. They're all 3 unperturbed by this. They just keep looking forward. They keep going about their journey. And lastly, you have the aspect of Dürer being this mathematician, which, you know, according to Anneliese Grinnell, he was quite interested in mathematics, specifically the geometry side of things. And looking at this print, that kind of makes sense, right? Because I think we can all agree that there is definitely a lot going on in this print, but it's almost like an organized clutter, if you will, because the line work, it's so, I want to say clean. It's not messy in the slightest, so even though there's a lot going on, it's all very structured due to those straight and clean lines. So moving on from that, I want to talk a little bit about proportion. And once again, I have three main things I want to talk about here. I want to talk about forced eye movement, the size of Death and the Devil right there, and the castle in the background, which I pointed out earlier. So forced eye movement. What I mean by this is if you are looking at an ad, if you're watching a commercial or anything, your eyes are immediately drawn to the largest thing or the thing in the center of the art piece at hand. And this is no different in this artwork, because the knight is definitely the largest figure in this artwork, and he is also in the center. And that is definitely done on purpose because, by all means, he is this main subject of this art piece. It's not called Death, the Knight, and then the Devil. It's the Knight, Death, and the Devil. As for the size of Death and the Devil, there are really two theories as to why this is. I mean, you could say it's a perspective thing because they're kind of behind them, so it makes sense that they're a little bit smaller, but I also think there is this idea of good versus evil here, in which case, yeah, they're adversaries, yeah, they're supposed to be conflicts for him, but if you think to fairy tales or just like old knight stories, typically good wins out over evil in the end, and I think the size has a power play in that. The knight is bigger than Death and the Devil, so it kind of shows that he has more power, he has more control over them, even though they create this dark mood and overbearing sense of tone on him. And lastly, you have the castle in the background here, and there are, once again, there's like two main theories I would say for this. There's either he is coming from this castle and he still has a long journey ahead of him, or the castle can just kind of be seen as like a goal, maybe like his home or something of that nature. But either way, his journey is still far from over. He still has a lot to go, and he still has these two evil entities beside him along the journey, which is how that creates that sense of a somber mood that I've been talking about. And I think that's all I have for proportion. So moving on to color. So while I don't have a lot to say about color, it does not mean it is not very, very important in this art piece.